Hello and welcome. You're watching the news. I'm Gargi Rawat. Coming up ahead, the G20 all set to begin tomorrow. We'll be bringing you what's on the agenda as world leaders start arriving. Also, the Prime Minister made a quick trip to Jakarta for the ASEAN summit and sent a message to China. Let's take a look at the headlines at this hour. On the agenda for the G20, NDTV says talks will center around volatile food and energy prices, multilateral development banks. Also, there may be a Delhi declaration, and will the inclusion of African Union be the big achievement of India's presidency? Junior External Affairs Minister Meenakshi Lekhi says India's presidency of the G20 will be a watershed moment and the G20 is witnessing the voice of the Global South. On the eve of the G20, the Prime Minister makes a quick trip to Jakarta for the ASEAN summit, talks about historic ties and cooperation and a big message to China, talks on sovereignty and following international laws in the South China Sea. Arunachal Pradesh Chief Minister Pema Khandu says the centre has proposed a large barrage on the Xiang River in the state to keep it alive in view of the potential threats from a huge dam being built upstream by China. The World Heritage Site Sachi in Raisen district has become India's first solar city. It will reduce carbon emissions by 13,747 tons. And Shahrukh Khan's new thriller Javon gets a rousing welcome at the box office. Will director Atli's film bridge the North-South divide as South fans also give it a big reception? So India all set for the big G20 summit, which begins tomorrow. Prime Minister Narendra Modi will be holding 3 bilaterals tomorrow. One of them will be with US President Joe Biden. Some of the key business on the agenda will center around volatile food and energy prices, multilateral development banks. Also, the big question whether there will be a Delhi declaration. Now, earlier today, NDTV's Maria spoke to Minister of State External Affairs Meenakshi Lekhi about India's push for the inclusion of African Union in G20. Listen to what she had to say.
The Prime Minister has written to all the G20 members for the inclusion of African Union. Recently in an interview, he emphasized on the role Africa has to play because of the larger multilateral world that we are living in, and there cannot be a growth of the world if African nations remain underdeveloped. What is the response that you have got from the G20 members?
No, this was very well taken and very well accepted, and that's why we look at the global leadership of the Prime Minister, and because of, I think, his acceptance by the global leaders is, and because the philosophy he comes with is Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam, let no one be left behind. In addition to the fact on the practical side, and I'm talking on the material practical side, in addition to the fact that it's only morally correct to get them in, the practical side of it is that if you have to work out at an economic policy, the economic policy needs to consider everyone and every aspect of it, and it has to be a comprehensive policy. In that comprehensive policy, you will work out the supply chains. And when you work out the supply chains, right from procurement of material to the working on the material to the finished goods have to be taken care of. And unless you have taken care of the resources, and most of the African nations are very rich in resources, but they could be depleted in investment or finance or skills. So the people who have the investment capacity or who have the technology to skill others do not come forward to initiate that process, the resource mismanagement is bound to happen and can lead to all other kinds of conflict. So the best way forward is to comprehensively work together, and thus African Union and other countries from Global South and becoming the voice of the voiceless in Global South has been the primary drift which this G20 has seen over the years. And that is why this G20 will be remembered far more because this will be a watershed moment for all subsequent G20s which are yet to come.
All right, so the inclusion of the African Union will be a big achievement for India, this G20. Let's go across to Maria now for more. And Maria, tell us, already there have been some achievements ahead of the summit talks even taking place.
Yes, that's right, Gargi. And by this time tomorrow, most of the world leaders would have arrived in New Delhi, and perhaps the series of bilaterals that the Prime Minister will have with his counterparts would have begun. But when we look at the achievements, India's G20 presidency, yes, it has been high on optics. A people's presidency, truly, one where we have showcased India's rich cultural heritage. But when it comes to policy achievements, I think it's important to highlight what India has managed to achieve. In the last 10 months, India has sent a message of being the voice of the global south, being the voice of the voiceless, that those 125 countries which came together when India held that very important conference in the month of January becomes important. The fact, as you said, Gargi, rightly, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has written to the G20 members that African Union must be included and G20 expanded to have an addition of one African Union, all of them being represented by one, which will be, making it a total of 21. But when we look at the deliverables, what India has achieved, let's not forget that India has managed to reinforce multilateralism. India has managed to send a message that when it comes to, diversity, equity, and accessibility of technology and science, that's an important takeaway. When it comes to sending a message of multilateral development banks, a new framework must be put in place because in the challenging times or in the new world order that we are seeing, emerging nations, particularly the African nations, must be provided with more capital support. India has managed to send a message, and the outcome document that came from the foreign ministers' meet becomes very important, Gargi, here, which was the chair summary in which India managed to highlight the theme of multilateralism, countering terrorism, and addressing global concerns, among others. We have talked about, the achievements of agriculture chief scientists as well. So when we look at various phrases that have emerged in the last 10 months, empower becomes important again, because India has sent a message that as far as women's economic representation is concerned, that can happen only with empowerment to women. When it comes to, the digital economy ministers meeting, the focus on digital public infrastructure, sending a message that there is a template that is available for India, which can be perhaps taken forward by most of the countries in the world. And interestingly, at Bharat Mandapam, there will be real-life experience that will be available for the world leaders to really understand how UPI success has been implemented in India.
All right, all that on the agenda. Thanks so much, Maria, for joining us with that. And also, crypto will be in focus, and a common framework or a template on crypto assets expected to emerge during the G20 summit. The expected framework will provide guidance to deal with risks, both financial and regulatory, related to such digital currencies. Sources say India's presidency of G20 has prepared a presidential note related to crypto assets to aid global leaders to take a view on such digital currency. Here's a report.
New Delhi seems all set to give a go-ahead at the G20 summit for a global regulatory framework and a template to deal with crypto assets. Informed sources say world leaders are expected to sign off as a consensus has emerged on how the world should approach dealing with crypto assets.
Responsible global governance of fintech and artificial intelligence has been high on India's G20 agenda. New Delhi took the lead in bringing out a consensus based on papers presented by the IMF and the Financial Stability Board. Sources say the expected framework will provide guidance to deal with risk, both financial and regulatory, related to digital currencies. India's approach is based on the fact that in the case of digital assets, they are borderless, no regulation can work in isolation, and a coordinated approach is required, something Prime Minister Narendra Modi has been emphasizing.
समय के साथ अब हमारे सामने ऐसे विषय भी जुड़ते जा रहे हैं जिनके बारे में 10-15 साल पहले कोई सोच भी नहीं सकता था। अब जैसे क्रिप्टो करेंसी से जुड़ी चुनौती है, इस मामले में ज्यादा से ज्यादा इंटीग्रेटेड अप्रोच की जरूरत है। मैं समझता हूं इसके लिए एक ग्लोबल फ्रेमवर्क बनाया जाना चाहिए जिसमें सभी स्टेक होल्डर्स का ध्यान रखना चाहिए। आर्टिफिशियल इंटेलिजेंस को लेकर भी इसी प्रकार की अप्रोच की जरूरत है।
Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, who has been working with other finance ministers, had recently agreed for a global approach to deal with new fintech companies.
Crypto threat as well as an opportunity, but crypto is also an example that I use later to say how unless global cooperation. So building a responsible financial ecosystem is important. It has to be therefore, going back to the title, it has to be therefore inclusive, it has to be resilient, and it has to be sustainable. India's presidency has put on table in the G20 issues related to regulating or understanding that there should be a framework for handling issues related to crypto assets.
Consensus is also emerging on greater leverage of capital for multilateral development banks. India has been keen on a declaration incorporating all points of synergy.
Our shared purpose, shared planet, shared prosperity, and shared future.
Despite Russia and China having issues with food and energy issues and dealing with global debt.
The final outcome of the agreed text or declaration will be left to world leaders who will work on the emerging consensus to ensure that they can send a message across to the world on their approach towards new age technologies and companies. With camera person Pooja Arya, Sunil Prabhu, NDTV.
At the ASEAN summit today, Prime Minister Modi said that ASEAN is a central pillar of India's Act East policy, and in a big message to China, called for following international laws in South China Sea. This was during his opening remarks at the summit, the Prime Minister making a quick dash to Jakarta to attend it.
PM Narendra Modi in Jakarta for the India-ASEAN Summit and the East Asia Summit, just 2 days before hosting the G20 Summit in Delhi. Barely a day's visit, yet it symbolizes the importance India attaches to the extended neighborhood and Act East policy.
हमारी हिस्ट्री और ज्योग्राफी भारत और आसियान को जोड़ते हैं, साथ ही साझा वैल्यूज, क्षेत्रीय एकता, शांति, समृद्धि और मल्टीपोलर वर्ल्ड में साझा विश्वास भी हमें आपस में जोड़ता है.
The PM presented a 12-point proposal for strengthening India-ASEAN cooperation with establishment of multimodal connectivity and economic corridor that links Southeast Asia, India, West Asia and Europe. He offered to share India's digital public infrastructure stack with ASEAN partners. The PM announced an India-ASEAN Fund for a Digital Future, invited ASEAN countries to join the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. 2 joint statements, one on maritime cooperation, the other on food security, were also adopted. Soon after several countries have opposed China's so-called standard map, PM Modi called for following international laws in South China Sea in his opening remarks at East Asia Summit. Need of the hour is such that an Indo-Pacific, where international law, including UN clause, is equally applicable to all countries, where there is freedom of navigation and overflight, and where there is unimpeded lawful commerce for the benefit of everyone. India believes that the Code of Conduct for South China Sea should be effective and in accordance with UN clause. Additionally, it should take into consideration the interests of countries that are not directly involved in the discussions. On the sidelines of the summits, External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar met his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov, who will also lead the Russian G20 delegation to Delhi. This meeting assumes significance given the deep divide in G20 due to the Russia-Ukraine war and India striving for a joint statement. In Delhi, Kadambini Sharma for NDTV.
In a significant development, Arunachal Pradesh Chief Minister Pema Khandu told the State Legislative Assembly that the centre has proposed to construct a large barrage on the Xiang River in the state to keep it alive, and this in view of the potential threats from a huge dam on the Yarlung-Tsangpo River upstream of the Xiang in China. China is reportedly building several dams on the Yarlung-Tsangpo in the Tibet region, and the Yarlung-Tsangpo becomes the Xiang once it crosses into India into Arunachal Pradesh. Now, a big crackdown on terrorists in Jammu and Kashmir. The properties of terrorists and proclaimed offenders who are living in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir have been attached. Some of these offenders have been living in POK for the last 30 years and now they will lose their property.
It could be the biggest crackdown on militancy in Jammu and Kashmir. The police say properties of hundreds of local militants who are operating from Pakistan-occupied Kashmir for the last 30 years will be attached. The process has started with declaring Pakistan-based local militants proclaimed offenders.
जो मुल्क के वतन के कौम के लोगों के गदार हैं वो पाकिस्तान में जाकर के पनाह लेके बैठ गए जहां पर दहशतगर्दी की कार्रवाइयों में पहले शामिल थे अभी उस पार से बैठ के दहशतगर्दी को फरोग देने की कोशिशें करते हैं उनका डाटा भी तैयार कर लिया गया है चंद रोज पहले डोडा रेंज के अंदर ऐसे जो गदार लोग हैं उनके खिलाफ बड़ी सख्त कार्रवाई करी गई है उनकी प्रॉपर्टीज की जब्ती उनको भगौड़े करार देना.
The intelligence wing of the Jammu and Kashmir Police has already prepared a list of 4,200 local militants who are based in the POK since 1990. Sources say their property details have already been shared with the Inspector General of Registrations and Revenue so that no such property is allowed to be sold or transferred. Police are even attaching properties of those who give shelter to militants. In Sopore, once considered a hotbed of militancy, Lieutenant Governor Manoj Sinha asked people not to give shelter to militants.
हमारे प्रशासन की सर्वोच्च प्राथमिकता और आवाम से केवल एक अपेक्षा है कि ऐसे तत्वों को संरक्षण आप मत दीजिए, ऐसे तत्वों को प्रश्रय मत दीजिए, बाकी काम पुलिस और फोर्स के लोग कर लेंगे.
In 2010, over 300 militants came back to India from POK under the government's surrender and rehabilitation policy. But over 4,000 are still believed to be in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir.
Fight against militancy in Jammu and Kashmir is not just limited to encounters and killing of militants. Police are also targeting their ideology, finances and support base. Now attaching properties of local militants who are based in POK is seen as a fresh assault on militancy. In Srinagar, Nazir Masudi, NDTV.
Now, an extremely alarming report when it comes to climate change, and according to a latest report brought out by the Copernicus Climate Change Service, August 2023 was the warmest August on record globally and warmer than all other months except the previous month of July. The global temperature anomaly for the first 8 months of this year, that's January to August, ranks second warmest on record, and global temperature records continue to tumble in 2023 with the warmest August following on from the warmest July and June, leading to the warmest boreal summer on record going back to 1940. 2023 is currently ranked as the second warmest at only 0.01 degrees Celsius behind 2016, with 4 months of the year still remaining. So given this alarming numbers when it comes to climate change, the need of the hour is clean energy, and the World Heritage Site of Sanchi in Raisen district, Madhya Pradesh, has become India's first solar city, which will reduce carbon emissions by 13,747 tons. Take a look.
With a capacity of 3 megawatts, India's first solar city in Nagori near Sanchi will reduce annual carbon dioxide emissions by 13,747 tons, equivalent to planting more than 2,38,000 trees.
ये अत्यंत गौरव का विषय है. देश का पहला शहर है सांची जो सोलर सिटी घोषित हो रहा है. कोयले की बिजली हो, पेट्रोल डीजल की बिजली हो, इसके अंधाधुंध इस्तेमाल के कारण प्रकृति पर बड़ा गहरा दुष्प्रभाव पड़ा है।
In the future, a 5 megawatt solar project will be established in Gulgaon, which will meet the energy needs of the agricultural sector near Sanchi. About 7,000 people of Sanchi have pledged to save electricity by using solar lamps and lanterns in their homes. About 63 kilowatt capacity solar plants have been installed on domestic rooftops. In Sanchi with Naved Anurag Dwari for NDTV.
And it's SRK mania that's gripped the country as Shahrukh Khan's new film Javon hit screens. It was a massive party outside cinema halls today with dhol, posters, queues, some fans dressed up as Shahrukh Khan and some even pouring milk on his posters. Many were dancing inside the theatres as well. This thriller directed by Atlee has Shahrukh Khan starring opposite Nayantara. Well, let's go across to Pratibha now, who's joined by some fans. In fact, Pratibha, you've been speaking to fans all day. I don't know if you managed to catch the film, but tell us what the reactions have been like.
I've not even managed to catch the snacks during intervals here and forget the film. But so far, yes, all the fans here have been talking so highly about Javon, and people have been queuing up for the tickets. The night show tickets are not available. It's been running a house full ever since. And here is one who has been extremely lucky with respect to the tickets. आपको कैसा लग रहा है? आप बहुत खुश हैं कि आपको टिकट्स मिल गई है?
हाँ, मिल गई है। थैंक यू।
आप कितने बड़े फैन हो शाहरुख खान के?
हम बहुत हूँ, पसंद है।
पसंद है आपको? ओके, आप उनके कितने फिल्म्स देखे हैं?
ऑलमोस्ट 50 से ऊपर ही देखा है।
ओके, कोई एक डायलॉग आपका जो फेवरेट है? हाँ? कोई एक डायलॉग आपको जो फेवरेट है?
डॉन को पकड़ना मुश्किल ही नहीं, नामुमकिन है।
हाँ, और अब फिल्म को पकड़ना भी मुश्किल है?
नहीं, इसको तो नहीं पकड़ सकते।
क्या आप बता सकते हैं आप कितने बड़े फैन हैं शाहरुख खान?
शाहरुख खान का तो बहुत बड़ा फैन हूँ। हम तो बहुत से फिल्म देखा है शाहरुख खान का। क्या अभी फिल्म देखने के लिए आए थे, आज तो फुल था, कल का टिकट मिल रहा है। क्या आज टिकट लेने के लिए आ गया कल के लिए।
बहुत डिसअपॉइंटेड है कि आज फर्स्ट डे जो रिलीज हुआ है आप देख नहीं पाए?
हम तो क्या उसी के लिए हम वेट कर रहे हैं कि कल का टिकट लेने के लिए।
So there is a sense of disappointment as well as sense of excitement that he's able to catch the film at least tomorrow. क्या आप बता सकते हैं आप कितने बड़े फैन हैं?
हम तो बहुत बड़े फैन हैं शाहरुख खान के, मगर माशाल्लाह बहुत बड़े फैन हैं। मगर आज का टिकट नहीं मिला, मगर कल का टिकट लिया हुआ है। देख लीजिए। मगर बाप को मारने से पहले बेटे को मारने से पहले बाप का सामना करना पड़ेगा, यही डायलॉग है शाहरुख खान का इस फिल्म में। मगर फिल्म में जो सुपर हिट है 5 में 5 स्टार।
So all of them waiting to see the film at least tomorrow because the night shows are running a house full here in Bengaluru. A lot of excitement right since morning that we've been catching up with fans here. Gargi.
And Pratibha, have you managed to get a ticket yet?
Not yet. If you can actually give me permission now, I'll go and run to the ticket counter.
Please go ahead. Yes, absolutely. Please go ahead. Pratibha, they're bringing us the excitement among Shahrukh Khan fans. And moving away from that, now India's ambitious spacecraft mission Aditya L1 today sent pictures of the Earth and Moon clicked as it heads to its destination, the Lagrangian point, which is located 1.5 million kilometers from the Earth. The images were shared by ISRO on Twitter along with a selfie that Aditya L1 had clicked. And finally, today is Janmashtami, which marks the birth of Lord Krishna. And here's a look at celebrations in different parts of the country.